All right, hello, hi, bonjour. Welcome back to another video. This particular one will be an interesting one as we are covering the potential Gfinity Elite Series UKCS teams' upcoming roster changes. Um, One thing that I will state to begin this with is that bear in mind a lot of it is hearsay to an extent in terms of just the research that I've been able to do. There's been some which has been publicly shown to an extent, so you can kind of pick it up from that. But I'm not going to say it's completely guaranteed. Bear in mind, there's contracts and everything in place with teams that are in the Elite Series anyway, combined with the fact that it is a UKCS after all, and anything that's meant to be in place one day could be completely different the next. So just kind of bear with us on that one and don't hold me to everything if it doesn't necessarily come through. However, um, definitely going to be some interesting changes as we start to go through them in a bit. One thing that I would say is kind of going into this Elite Series, I was expecting maybe a bit more stability with the rosters, but one thing you do have to bear in mind is the way that this first season was kind of done and announced. A lot of teams kind of knew before others in terms of if they were participating in the Elite Series or not. So it did leave a few teams a bit short-handed, plus certain other scenarios, e.g. the Smooya to Endpoint to Epsilon scenario as well, where it just fucks things up with a short amount of space or a short amount of time in order to kind of rectify and get someone in that you really, really want. So I would say going forward that as much as it's shitty as always for UKCS roster changes to be happening, but at the same point going into season two, hopefully it gives people a bit more time and whatnot in order to kind of get that correct roster and hopefully it sticks out. But you have to bear in mind, in theory, a lot of these aren't publicly announced yet, just for the fact that the Elite Series is still ongoing. We have the final week this week before we start going into the playoffs and the finals, etc., etc. So bear with us on that one. However, what we will do now, we will go into what the current rosters of the teams are. So Reason Gaming, Thomas, Cray, Cinder, Karma Panya, Hoodlum, Method, Nilzinho, Weber, Pulse, Jenko, and Stanley. XL, Jacob, Boaster, Connor, Windansky, Lazar, Endpoint, Imi, Mighty Max, Pickles, Cryptics, and Jesp, and then Team Infused with Red Snake, Aaron, MCK, Trials, and Fryer 1. Now, Reason's performances this Elite Series have just been below average to say the least. It's just not worked out. Thomas was missing for a couple of weeks as well, which was some much needed firepower. Whether it would have changed anything remains to be seen. It's doubtful, realistically. Um, it's a shame, but personally, I think going into it, they were going to be deemed as one of the weaker lineups going into things. So it hasn't really worked out. So the changes are naturally expected to happen with them. Method, everyone thought best UK team since they transitioned from FM over to Method. It's just not worked out for them in any way, shape, or form this season. They'll be the first persons, like people, to hold their hands up and say that it's just not been good enough for their own standards and methods and for what overall they were expecting to do. So again, changes very much expected with that, and we'll go through them soon. Excel is probably the most interesting one I'd actually say out of all of this because of performances wise, I don't actually think they've been bad. They just haven't been able to see games out properly and haven't been able to grind out that result from the Elite Series. Just because of the amount of kind of they've probably come closest when it comes to kind of each map and how many rounds they're actually taking off other teams, but they're just not being able to see it out. So I wouldn't say it's anything major that kind of needs to be fixed from Excel, but at the end of the day, a loss is a loss, a win is a win, a draw is a draw. Like if you're not actually picking up the results needed and the points to do well, then what does it matter? Endpoint, on the other hand, I think they were probably in for a tough time from the beginning. In fairness, with the whole Smoothie situation and the way that then like getting that roster sorted, it was never going to be a set in stone roster from the way that I could personally perceive it, just because of how late everything did happen. And as I said in the beginning, I think a lot of these teams going into it weren't exactly fully prepared or as prepared as they'd like to be because of the time frames on everything. But yeah, performances wise, been a bit hit and miss from Endpoint, but Endpoint are that team of just inconsistency overall. They have been for a while in terms of one game they will literally turn up, be absolutely amazing. The next game it will just completely go wrong. So um, be very, very interesting when we start going through the changes that will be happening with Endpoint. And then Team Infused. Team Infused is probably the kind of the again a really interesting one, I guess, with this because of maybe deemed as one of the weaker teams from the start, but at the same point, recent results have dictated otherwise. So I don't necessarily know what changes are going to happen with Infuse just because of depending on how these performances go. If they do continue to do well, then why would you change a potentially winning formula? So be very interesting to go through those, but we will start kicking into the actual changes. So here we go. New roster for Reason Gaming. Thomas, Cray, Cinder, Rom, Fry one or Stanley as the fifth. So Thomas, Cray and Cinder staying. Rom will then be coming in as the IGL due to Hoodlum departing. Hoodlum did publicly come out and say on Twitter that he was stepping down due to personal reasons and somewhat based on his role in the game. Rom coming in, experienced dude. One thing that I will give Rom as an IGL and other scenarios is that I think Rom is one of the better people for UKCS in terms of realizing the other side to things in terms of like the just understanding the map, understanding the game a bit more. We all know UK players can aim, but in terms of their understanding of the game and things like that and their attitudes is generally what's weak. So it'll be interesting to see what Rom can come in and do with that. Rom with his previous teams, it'll be like the one kind of question mark I'd personally put over it is it going to last with Rom going in there? Are people going to be happy with everything after a period of time with how things are going? That remains to be seen, but hopefully it does work out for them. And then the fifth change would supposedly on this one, from like digging up and various bits of me trying to do as much research as possible on this, Stanley is meant to be the fifth for this. However, Fry one did stand in for Reason in the recent EPS games, so I'm not entirely sure if that did mean anything in particular. So maybe Stanley is going to be that fifth, and then Fry one potentially could then come in after that. And then I mean, I guess it would be either Cray or Cinder that it would be taken out in that scenario if they were to add another person on top of Stanley, if Stanley was going to be that dedicated fifth. But I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is rumorville. This is me just basing upon my research, some of it which is publicly available, some of it me just digging completely. So again, don't hold me on all accounts for these. Method. So method's going to be the absolute, the really, really interesting one through this. So in theory, the two people to depart will be Webber and Stanley. So Webber's probably going to be the interesting one to a lot of people, from what I understand. Webber's just not been too happy with the way things have gone this season, so I'm guessing it's just going to want to change from that. However, the interesting part with the Webber scenario is Webber was in like actually in-game IGL, Nilzinho taking just the overall kind of team leader aspect to things, I imagine. But what that leaves is the kind of the interesting one. But the two people coming in, and this is where the firepower starts to get absolutely intense, is Surreal and Crucial. Surreal, formerly of Complexity, formerly playing in the UK scene, and when he did play in the UK scene before, he lit it up. Like in terms of overall KD, in terms of performances, he's literally kind of doing what Smooth is now doing now. In terms of just constantly, just his KD was absolutely through the roof, and you'd see him just single-handedly carry games. So I'm not entirely sure how much different he's going to be as a player since coming back from Complexity. I don't know if necessarily it depends on what roles they're going to give to Cyril and how much freedom they're going to give him, I guess, in terms of how that works out. Crucial, again, another staple that's been playing in the UK scene for a long period of time. Recently did have a X amount of time with Splice, and so played some very important games at a higher level than what UK scene is without a shadow of a doubt. But Crucial is definitely another one of those players that can just single-handedly carry games, and you're putting that alongside Jenko, who again the exact same thing. Probably lacked a lot of consistency this season in terms of one game he's absolutely mental and next game he's just not working out for him. Pulse, one of the best UK players for a good period of time now, and then Nilzinho there to round it out. So the only question mark that I would like remain over that is how it's going to work from a role perspective. So definitely be interesting to see. But that roster is got an insane amount of firepower in that, so be really really interesting to see what happens with them. We'll move over to the XL roster. So in theory, the two people supposedly departing XL are Connor and potentially Windansky. Connor, as far as I'm aware, has university commitments, so can't commit the time needed in order to play for the Elite Series and other tournaments. Windansky one, I'm not entirely sure if that is actually going to happen. I've just heard that he might potentially have some other commitments from what I've been able to look through. Not too sure if that is the case, so don't necessarily hold me on it. But the person coming in is apparently going to be Pickles. So Pickles already having a really good relationship with Boaster and the rest of the team on that XL lineup. So It's one that I probably foreseed coming anyway to an extent if he was to then go leave endpoint. So Pickles going in there. Personally, I think Pickles has done well from a KD perspective, especially from what I can see at face value at the very least. So Pickles going there would be a potential good move. The last one, as far as I'm aware, just rests on if Windansky stays or goes. Bear in mind they had Mole fill in for Windansky earlier on in the Elite Series, as well as Mole is a registered stub. Maybe that's something that could come to fruition as well if that was the case. But we will see in what remains to be seen with that particular one. So we'll move on to endpoint. I've just realized the graphics slightly fucked up, but this is the third time that I'm recording it, and I'm not gonna lie, I really can't be asked to do it again. So we'll go into it. So the endpoint one. So the endpoint one's probably the one that's varied it the most, I guess, in terms of that they're moving towards a more of an EU lineup. So it seems. So essentially, so as we've been over, Pickles, Cryptics, and Jesp are the three to go. So it means that Imi and Mighty Max duo are remaining as always, as it's always been for a long period of time now. And a new roster coming in. So Fasha and YNC are the two ones that, from what I can work out, are going to be the kind of confirmed ones, judging from the recent EPS results and just overall digging. Um, Fasha, the way going into it. So I mean, either way, the way that these two gents have kind of come into things is that YNC used to play for Kaz in the kind of EU lineup that he used to have with Rom, Jesp, ZNF and Smooya back in the day. That was with the whole Kaz Ben Bag incident where they went on to LAN and they didn't pay for everything, and it was a typical Ben Bag scenario. Nonetheless, though, YNC has also played for Fish 123 this season in the current UK Masters as well. Fasha played alongside YNC in Lowland Lions, so it kind of all links up together of how they've kind of been like found each other and started playing with each other. Not too sure on who the fifth is going to be with Endpoint as it stands. Jakey played in the recent UK Masters game, but as far as I'm aware, Jakey would be remaining as coach. I think he's actually done a good job. And being honest, there's such a wide hole for coaches in the UK scene at the moment that if someone can do it and can do it to a good level, then you're going to set yourself up for, like in a decent position. But the one question that I guess remains over that is if Endpoint do go the EU road, then it means that the kind of 3 out of 5 quota for UK tournaments wouldn't be hit. If they was to pick up another EU player, they could still, just bear in mind, pick up another UK player, which is what I'd expect in this scenario, just so that you don't have to necessarily change things out or just not participate in the UK tournaments. Because I guess from an endpoint org standpoint, they would still want them potentially entering in these UK tournaments, just because of, as a UK org, that is where your main target audience still remains, and potentially linking into other things like sponsorships and whatnot as well. But that's just clutching at straws again. So yeah, definitely interested. Not too sure who they could potentially. Well, there's a lot of options they could potentially go as a fifth, whether it be UK or EU. Remains to be seen what they're necessarily going to be doing with that one, though. But yeah, I mean, I haven't seen too much of Fasher and YNC, so I can't really go into it too much details of what I would kind of expect from that lineup, if it does come to fruition. But it's definitely one to keep an eye on to see how they do without a shadow of a doubt. So we'll move on to the final one, which would be the Team Infused. Now, the Team Infused one is a current weird situation from what I can work out. I need to stop moving my chair back. So Red Snake, Aaron, MCK Trials, and Fry One is the current roster now. From what I can kind of work out after doing a various amounts of digging, it's kind of, as far as I'm aware, changes was expected to happen, but due to potentially recent like performances, that might have changed things up. I think the one thing that you've got to bear in mind is, as much as it would be great to see a roster completely stick together, because of all the other roster shuffles that start happening, it's very, very rare that one team still comes out of it with a dedicated roster and the same roster that they had before. So I'm not entirely sure what is going to happen with that. Like I've already been over, there is the Fry one to Reason rumor that's lingering around. So there could be a lot of changes through that infused roster at the moment. But from having my ear to the ground, and trying to do some digging, like I said, with the other teams, some of them have kind of played their cards already with people that they're using for recent EPS games, but infused not with that scenario as it currently stands. So I genuinely couldn't say what's going to happen with them guys at the moment. But personally, I mean, if they continue to do well and they do manage to grab that qualifying spot for the playoffs for the Elite Series, then if they do well, then why change it? Just continue to give it a whirl. Hopefully, people can stay with that mindset and want to stick it out of the team. But you know how it works sometimes, especially with some of the other roster changes that happen, is someone else asks one of those players if they want to join, and then it starts putting doubts in their mind. They start questioning things, and then lo and behold, they end up leaving, which seems to be the go-to way of you doing things in UKCS roster changes. With regards to the three remaining teams in the Elite Series, so the EU teams, Prophecy, Epsilon, um, it's an interesting one overall. Like I genuinely can't say what those changes are potentially going to be. I don't have enough information to kind of base it on. I would expect Envy to potentially keep it the same, but I genuinely don't know. Epsilon Prophecy, I mean, they're already kind of making changes at the moment anyway for people that are kind of filling in, but they're from people that have had registered subs anyway for the Elite Series, but I'm not too sure what the implications of that long term would be. Um, and the Epsilon side of things, there's been a few rumors floating around. Good old Smoo, as always, in the news, but I'm not entirely sure what would be happening with that. But there has been certain reports throughout the whole season, sorry, that there are a few unhappy campers in that Epsilon lineup. So I'm not entirely sure, but I doubt that they are going to keep the exact same five. I would more than likely expect one change at the minimum to happen with that Epsilon roster, but again, that's all me hearsay. It's clutching at straws. I couldn't say for sure. Um, so yeah, once again, these are like as displayed the potential changes that will be up and coming. Again, potential hearsay. Don't like hold me fully accountable for it. It's just from what's been kind of publicly shown and what I can vaguely work out as to what the potentials of things would actually be. But bear in mind that would be it. So by all means, remember to like, comment, subscribe, hate, whatever it is you feel like doing today, my friends. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you get a bit of foresight as to some of the potential changes that will be happening within the UKCS world. Peace.